are we having Grab the Key? What does Grab the Key? All of those pieces, right? Where it started. And for us, Grab the Key started in 2018 as we took a look at the history of housing within the Black community, understanding the history of housing in the Black community. We wanted to create generational wealth through homeownership. And by doing so, we could do that through educational empowerment. So we've traveled across the country in different cities. We've partnered with some of the top real estate broker owners, some of the top agents, some of the top builders that are very passionate around bringing homeownership to Black and minority communities. And, you know, for us, we think it's very, very important to, if we're going to be helping our communities, we have to be in our communities across the country, right? And so, man, I'm super excited for today. You know, having this virtual event across the country to learn about home ownership and to learn, about the different pieces of it that sometimes are very scary, right? So, all right, before we jump into the first-time home buyer education information that we have for you guys today, we need to learn about Juneteenth, right? We need this is Juneteenth. This is Freedom Day. We need to learn about Juneteenth. So I want to pass it to a very special guest that we have here today, Kim Harrington, one of our branch leaders here in Atlanta. Kim, where you at, big time? I know Kim, and guys, just so everybody's aware, we have watch parties across the country. We have watch parties in the A as well. Kim, my man, I want to pass you the rock here so you can tell us and educate us a little bit around the history of Black housing and the importance of Juneteenth.
Montel, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, virtual and in person. Thank you guys so much for joining us to celebrate this amazing day in history. And so, why are we here, right? Why are we here? If I can think back as recent as January, this is the kind of feedback I got. There's no more slavery. We have equal access to things. For crying out loud, we had a Black president. So why do we need to focus on a specific segment of our community? Why do some people need extra attention? And why do I have to, falsely, why do I have to give up something to give to someone else? So false, 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 right? So progress does not mean all the problems have been eliminated. So I'm a realist. So I need primary sources. Primary sources are facts, right? So what I'd like to do is just, and I'm going to apologize in advance for giving you the Reader's Digest version of what I'm going to share with you, because I could spend 8 hours doing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time. And the thing about when I made those comments about as recent as January, people that have that view, they're looking at it through the lens of nostalgia. American history, the ice cream shop, and someone sitting at the counter drinking a milkshake, and the guy serving him has a little paper hat on. So we couldn't go to that ice cream shop, by the way. You remember that? You guys don't remember that, but you know what I'm talking about. So we need to look at history, American history. You cannot look at American history without race and without racism. Could you guys hear me? Okay, I'm just checking to make sure you're still with me. You cannot look at American history without race and without racism. So trigger alert, because it's not good, right? So let's go back. 244 years of forced labor. 244 years of forced labor, prohibited from learning to read, prohibited from learning to write, prohibited from worship, living in awful conditions, prohibited from learning how to swim, that the fear is if someone had the opportunity to swim away, they would do so. If you resisted slightly, you would feel the overseer's whip. Slightly. That was the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is that you would be hung in front of everybody, women, children, everybody, as an example. So when I say 244 years, what I'm really saying is 246 years. So the Civil War started in 1861, April of 1861. It was the southern states trying to secede from the northern states. Why? Because there was a movement towards abolishing slavery. But slavery was free labor. And so people were flourishing. 75% of the world's cotton supply came from the South. Did you guys know that? So you think about cotton, you think about tobacco, sugarcane, rice, forced labor. So why give that up? So as we're moving through the Civil War, in September 22nd of 1862, Lincoln notified those southern states that if you don't put down your arms, if you don't do this, I'm going to free the slaves on January 1st. So when you hear about history and Lincoln, we think that he was this person that said, I'm freeing all the slaves, and that's the reason, because I don't like it. So he didn't like it. However, the reason why he did it was because the North, the Union, was not making progress against the Confederacy. So he knew as soon as he pulled the slaves out of that debacle, that they wouldn't have the resources to support their efforts for the Confederacy. So they would lose their money. Does that make sense? Are you guys still with me? All right, so we have January 1st of 1863, Emancipation Proclamation, but it wasn't for another 2 years until June 19th of 1865, although the Civil War ended back in April. So another 2 months even after the Civil War ended. So let's move forward. Reconstruction. So there was, from 1865 to 1877, there's something called Reconstruction. And Reconstruction basically was reforming of governments. They were trying to get those southern states to integrate well with the northern states. And the problem was that there were rabid white supremacists in the South. And they weren't hearing it. They're like, oh no, we're not doing that. And so they would put these governments in place, these local governments. They would have federal guidance, but the people on the local level didn't want to hear it, so they didn't pay attention to it. And so who would punish those people that didn't pay attention to it? There was nothing called due process back then. You know that, right? No due process. Nobody to go to, because they all were like that. They wanted to hold on to that free labor. So I'm not going to go, the reason why I'm sharing it like this is because we all should know our history. I mean, to the little tiny details of it, to understand why we're doing what we're doing. If you are listening and you're a real estate agent or you're a lender, if you don't get compassionate and passionate about this, there's something wrong with you. This is part of something that you have to do. You have to do it. All right. So Reconstruction was a failure. Let's fast forward to 1892 in Louisiana. Homer Plessy. You guys know Homer? So what a lot of people don't know was that Homer was 7/8 white and 1/8 black. And so Homer got on a rail car intentionally got on a rail car for whites only. They knew who Homer was. They had alerted the staff on the train. They had alerted the local law enforcement that he was getting ready to do this. And he knew that he was going to get arrested, but he did it anyway. So he got on a whites only car. And they said, hey, you can't be here. You got to go. He said, I'm not going anywhere. You're violating my 14th Amendment. And so they arrested him. They jailed him. And so they fought this case all the way to the Supreme Court. So in 1896, the separate but equal doctrine, Plessy versus Ferguson, came online. So basically they were stamping approval for segregation. And so from 1896 until the 60s, the mid-60s, 1960s, was Jim Crow. And we're all familiar with Jim Crow, right? Separate but equal was never, ever separate but equal. It was always substandard, always overcrowded, everything that you can imagine. By the way, there's so much history from 1896 all the way up until 58 years later on May 17th, 1954. So Brown versus Board of Education. By the way, there had been cases before that that many people are not aware of. There were people that wanted to attend law school in Maryland and Missouri, and they weren't facilities available for people to go, people of color, to go to law school. They didn't have any. So the Supreme Court said, they're siding with the people that are pursuing this injunction, say, hey, we want to go here. So they have to go there, by the way. So no one knows about that, by the way, but these people that attended Maryland, University of Maryland, and Missouri, law school. However, those were like the baby steps to get to Brown versus Board of Education. So we get to Brown versus Board of Education, and basically they said that segregation is unconstitutional in schools. So they mandated that schools be desegregated. So I'm going to fast forward for 1 second, and Portia, if you could pop up that picture for me, that'd be great. All right. So that's my picture, by the way. That's my class picture from 1975. That's June of 1975. That's 21 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? The only white person in that picture is the teacher. And that's 21 years later. So when you think about the time and how much time it takes to make progress, it takes a lot of time. So it's not like right now in 2023, it's easy for people to say, oh, well, just do this and just do that. You have equal access. No, it's a grind. It's a struggle. There's a long history of this stuff going on. Okay, you can take that away, Portia. Thank you. Don't even worry about where I am in the picture. Okay, so let's fast forward. How am I doing, Montel? You good?
You good, brother. You good. Keep rocking,
okay.
Baby.
So let's fast forward to 1964, Civil Rights Act of 1964. Lyndon Johnson signed that. And he said that we had, and by the way, this was the formation of the EEOC, by the way. Same Civil Rights Act was the formation of EEOC. Did you guys know that? In 1964. So it's illegal to treat people differently. Segregation is illegal. No separate water fountains, no separate, nothing like that, right? 1964. 1965, Voting Rights Act. Now I'm going to blow your mind right now. If we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, why did we need the Fair Housing Act of 1968? It should have been covered. But what happened was real estate agents, financial institutions were discriminating against Black people. So there's a family called the Rochelle family, African-American couple. They were upper middle class in New York. They worked for the Fuller Wig Company. You guys familiar with the Fuller Wig Company? Fuller Wig Company is African-American owned wig company. Madly successful, millionaires, even back then. So Mr. Rochelle worked for the Fuller Wig Company. He was a salesman. He was a baller. He would get after it, and he was upper middle class. He could have literally purchased a home anywhere, easily. But he wanted to live in Bergen County, New Jersey. And it just so happens that a CBS News crew was following him around during his housing search. And every time he went to a place he wanted to live, they said, we don't have anything else available. Why don't you go over there? You know what that means, right? Steering. So you guys know about steering. So, and so then the CBS News crew would send in a white couple afterwards. Guess what? Let me show you this and let me show you that. So that's why 1968. And so let's fast forward to 1977. CRA, Community Reinvestment Act. So all these things matter. All the history of it matters. The slow pace of things matter. The reason why we have a grab the key event, the reason why we want to communicate information to you guys is because you can have the knowledge. So there is a wealth gap between white families and Black families. Here in Atlanta, at least a few years ago, white households had 78% home ownership, Black families 42%. You see the gap? So it's not just a gap in home ownership, but it's a gap in generational wealth. So about legacy purposes, how is someone able to go to college and someone else isn't able to go to college? Because we didn't have the opportunity to own a home and build equity and use that equity to send somebody to college. Does that make sense? All right. So I told you, I apologize in advance for the Reader's Digest version, but that's what it is. And I'm telling you right now, there's a whole lot in between. History is important. And what you guys do for a living, you guys make a difference in people's lives, not just their lives, but their kids' lives and their kids that aren't even here yet. So that's why it's really important. And by the way, I appreciate you guys being here because we have some other information for you after we go offline.